The way it currently stands, forced labor, slavery takes precedence over rehabilitation and public safety.
Oh, by the way, while the Biden administration gives reparations to everyone but freed people, look at the billions he has run over to Ukraine.
We don't have black grocery stores because if you think about it now, just to get in that supply chain, it's almost unheard of.
They don't want the truth to get out. Okay? I don't want to know what my family did or what all these people did and all this stuff like that. Okay?
Come on.
You read that 500-page report.
There's this thing called white superiority and black inferiority. That mindset allows all of the behaviors that we've seen across generations.
I had no idea that church I was running by every day was something my grandfather established.
This is not a handout. This is a debt that is owed.
You know, Allensworth was like the internet of his time in 1904, 1905.
The total black population in California is about 2.6 million, and then of that, the descendants compose about 2.2 million of that. So California, with a multi-billion-dollar surplus, can absolutely afford to satisfy the international terms for reparations, beginning with compensation.
Any financial obstacle that exists that impedes the success of increasing financial prosperity needs to be dealt with and eliminated.
No matter where we've been, no matter what part of this fight we've been in, we've been harmed, and we've had harm done to us specifically.
When I got to Los Angeles, this was some of the worst segregation I'd ever seen. And remember, I'm telling you, I'm from Mississippi.
Because as you can see, I'm giving you broken history right now, you know? But I had to give it to you guys today. I said, no, I got to show them this because it's so precious and nobody really knows about it.
Overnight, it's like, oh, it's no longer the quarters, now it's Lincoln Heights. Oh, so now we get to use Abraham Lincoln for our name. And you think about all the other people that they could have used, but they picked Lincoln. And I think that's sort of a stereotypical of what they do.
There wasn't any black restaurants. As far as black business and weed, it wasn't none.
Black people don't have that kind of luxury. Our historically black communities have been redistricted multiple times.
Why has it been easier for other groups than us?
Because of anti-black hatred.
Now listen, if you can't handle the TR room, don't tune in.
All right, welcome. This is the San Francisco Reparations Plan read. This is part 2. Before we get started, right now, the Reparations documentary is available at reparationsnowdoc.com. It's reparationsnowdoc.com, released on Juneteenth. If you have yet to see it, please check it out at reparationsnowdoc.com. Check out obsidiandad.com and the new released Welcome to California, right now available on all retail online outlets, including iTunes and Amazon, etc. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, the last and final AB 3121 California Reparations Task Force meeting, the 16th meeting, is coming up on June 29th, 2023 at 9 a.m. If you can't be in the building, then you can watch it right here on EMEND, the Mass Media Group. You can say what you want to say, comment how you want to comment. Just keep it respectful and keep it peace. All right, so let's go back. Once again, this is the San Francisco reading, part 2. And if you didn't see yesterday's read, we actually went over some of the committees, members yesterday. So you can check that out at sanfranciscoreparations.org/committee-members. All right, so let's continue where we left off at the child welfare system. Okay, let me just make sure my music is halfway decent. Okay, let's go. Child welfare system. The child welfare system in San Francisco continues to separate families. San Francisco has sent the majority of its foster kids to other California counties every year for the past decade. According to data from the UC Berkeley California Child Welfare Indicators Project, in July 2022, San Francisco placed 65% of its foster kids in a different county. This is almost double the state average of 33%. Understanding the racial demographics that exist within the child care system further demonstrates the racial disparity that remains prevalent across the Bay Area. In San Francisco, the percentage of Black children in foster care in 2018 was more than 25 times the rate of white children. The kids sent away are effectively separated from their support network of family and friends and are dropped into a foreign environment with foster parents they often have not met before. I just want to take a quick pause. I can't remember the exact act, and I don't know if they ruled on it. I think they might have already ruled on the Native Americans, and there's a case with the Native Americans and an adoptee or parents that adopted them, and I believe the Supreme Court, don't quote me, to double check as of late, was it Keene or Hacken? I think Hacken versus Bracken or something like that. Anyway, don't quote me. But I think the Supreme Court actually favored the Native American family, but got to follow up on that. But it's just interesting, how for descendants in this particular case with the welfare system, it's, kind of like the same thing. And it's pretty much been happening to us since, we've been enslaved in the United States of America. So it's like, not much has changed. But hopefully, if anybody is in the foster care system, hopefully they're being treated with some dignity and respect. All right, let's continue. Health outcomes. Discrimination in healthcare for Black Bay Area residents has negatively affected the community's access to basic services. As early as 1853, Black San Franciscans were banned from receiving treatment at medical facilities. Like the U.S. Marine Hospital, African Americans were confined to segregated sections of state hospitals. In the 1970s, the Black Panther Party provided free, community-based healthcare clinics to administer basic amenities and address the lack of service and medical discrimination experienced by Black Californians. At the clinics, medical professionals helped train health workers to administer services to patients. However, local governments like the Oakland Police Department retaliated against this movement and harassed the Black Panther Party for soliciting clinic funds without proper permits. Healthcare discrimination against Black Californians is worsened by the fact that there are not enough Black physicians in California to meet the needs of the Black population. Black physicians represent less than 3% of the entire medical profession in California, despite the African American population representing 6% of the state's population. The passage of Proposition 209 in California further limited this number by prohibiting the consideration of race, ethnicity, or national origin in public education, employment, and contracting. As a result, within California's private medical schools, the proportion of Black students graduating fell from 6% in 1990 to 5% in 2019. In California, Black women are more likely to experience health complications during pregnancy, have premature births, die in childbirth and lose their babies than their white counterparts. In San Francisco, black babies have died at almost 5 times the rate of white babies in the past decade. A study has found that when a black doctor is the primary physician in these cases, the infant mortality rate is cut in half. Black LGBTQ Americans also suffer from adverse health conditions at higher rates than other demographics. Within the American West, the black queer community is more likely to be uninsured and are more likely to be diagnosed with depression, asthma, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, and cancer. Additionally, a study in 2021 found that black transgender women in the San Francisco Bay Area are at higher risk of suffering from hate crimes because of the intersectional effects of transphobia and racism. This demographic has a higher likelihood to be the victim of battery with a weapon compared to white transgender women who participated in the study. All right. 2. A legacy of institutional harms of San Francisco's black communities. San Francisco's international reputation as a liberal destination for free thought and uninhibited opportunities is undermined by its legacy of mistreatment, violence towards, and targeted racism against black Americans. Founded in 1776 under Spanish colonial rule, and later established in the 1840s, San Francisco experienced its first notable boom as a port city, providing an entry to miners who had discovered gold up in the Alta California coast. Being a land of opportunity, innovation, and self-made wealth is part of the city's identity. It's something that has driven its international claim and attraction. Despite the reputation of liberalism, San Francisco has consistently imposed limitations on who has access to the city's abundant wealth. Since its founding, black people in San Francisco have faced significant barriers to full participation in its society and economy. Through efforts to control the physical movement and financial attainment of black people, San Francisco and California more broadly imposed laws that enshrined white supremacy and ensured the racial subjugation of African American and other non-white citizens. Despite now being nearly 160 years away from the Emancipation Proclamation, the vestiges of chattel slavery in the United States deeply and directly continue to have a harmful effect on the current era social, economic, health, academic, legal, and cultural experiences and outcomes of Black and African American people in San Francisco. I'm gonna pause real quick. Shout out to Reps, thanks for coming. And yes, we might actually try to stream the, I guess they kind of have some like Office of Reparations. They're proposing it in San Francisco. So if we can try to stream it, we're going to try to stream it. If not, then it is what it is. But yes, thanks for that, Reps. As always, appreciate you and your time and energy in this fight for reparations. All right, so let's continue. All right. All right. Okay. California and its localities meaningfully enforced and upheld slavery by perpetuating the racial caste system of subjugating Black Americans from the freedoms assured to them by the Declaration of Independence. The state's founders were pro-slavery. 36% of American-born Californians in the 1950s were white Southerners who strategically sought statehood for California as a, quote, free state, end quote, to avoid controversy and expedite access to federal resources. California's first elected governor, Peter Burnett, was a renowned racist who had established Oregon as a whites-only state through its legislature in 1844 and attempted to do the same in California in 1849. His efforts failed because of the desire of pro-slavery settlers to utilize and economically benefit from slave labor across the state. While neither San Francisco nor California formally adopted the institution of chattel slavery, the tenets of segregation, white supremacy, and systemic repression and exclusion of black people were codified through legal and extra-legal social codes and judicial enforcement. Non-white people initially could not serve as witnesses in cases involving white defendants in California. In 1852, California passed a Fugitive Slave Act that was harsher than the federal fugitive slave law, making California a more pro-slavery state than most other free states. Voting rights were not enacted for black men until the late 1870s, and school segregation was ruled legal by the California Supreme Court in 1874. Beyond the enforcement of slavery's interpersonal relationship management in California, both individuals and organizations in California economically benefited from slave labor. Since the first enslaved Africans were brought to its shores in 1619, the United States was wholly supportive of and dependent upon the enslavement of African people and their descendants as a vehicle that established and propelled the country's economy. In San Francisco, despite not technically enforcing slavery, slaveholders were allowed to enter and leave the state with their enslaved property, exploiting and further profiting from their unpaid labor within California state lines across a broad spectrum of work, including but not limited to housekeeping, childcare, food service, and mining. San Francisco Slavery Era Disclosure Ordinance. Institutionally, today's financial wealth in San Francisco can be tied to profits procured during enslavement. In 2006, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors passed the Slavery Era Disclosure Ordinance, SEDO, authored by former District 10 Supervisor Sophie Maxwell. This ordinance enumerates the legacy of systemic harms that have disproportionately affected the black community as a result of the practice of slavery in the United States, and requires that city contractors providing insurance or insurance services, financial services, or textiles to the city must complete an affidavit verifying whether the contractor, its parent company, or subsidiary has participated in or received profits from chattel slavery. If the company uncovers records that connect the business to chattel slavery, they are required to submit an affidavit to the city administrator that identifies 1. The names of each person subjected to slavery, each slaveholder, and each person or entity who participated in the slave trade or derived profits from the slave trade mentioned in the records. 2. A description of the type of transaction, services, or other acts evidenced by the records. And 3. The extent and nature of any profits from the slave trade evidenced by the records. These documents are then made available to the public and included in a report to the mayor and the Board of Supervisors. All right, so let's see here. Slavery Era Disclosure. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and just put that in the notes. So we just have it on record. All righty. Let's continue. Right. These documents. Okay. The SEDO offers precedent for the city and county of San Francisco to acknowledge its role in economically benefiting from those affected by this historical injustice. In compliance with the City and County of San Francisco Slavery Disclosure Ordinance 2006, the following companies have shared their economic profits are historically tied to the institution of chattel slavery. Bank of America, U.S. Bank National Association. The ordinance also states that the city will suffer actual damages due to contractors' failure to comply with this ordinance. To date, no companies have provided any contributions to ameliorate the effects of slavery. I'm going to repeat that again. The ordinance also states that the city will suffer actual damages due to contractors' failure to comply with this ordinance. To date, no companies have provided any contributions to ameliorate the effects of slavery. Strengthening the San Francisco Slavery Era Disclosure Ordinance. Fund relies on voluntary contributions. San Francisco's SEDO, I'm just gonna say CEDO for now, just keeping it short and tight, establishes a fund to promote healing and assist in remedying depressed economic conditions, poverty, unequal educational opportunity, and other legacies of slavery era among the population of the city, and encourages companies affected by the ordinance to contribute to the fund. However, contributions are voluntary to date. There have been 0 contributions to this fund. This ordinance would have much more of an impact if contributions were mandatory. Okay. Side note, interjection. Duh. Let's continue. Considerable exceptions carved out in legislation. Contractors in a number of categories are exempted from this legislation, including companies that provided medical or dental insurance to city employees and administrators of the city's retirement fund. Holding these companies to different standards weakens the efficacy of the CEDO. In order to have a greater impact, every company that has disclosed an economic benefit from slavery to the city and county of San Francisco should contribute a percentage of annual profits. Passive enforcement mechanism. The San Francisco CEDO includes language outlining an enforcement mechanism through the Office of the City Administrator. However, the fines for non-compliance appear to be lenient and the disclosures are voluntary. To make this ordinance truly effective, there should be more strict enforcement and harsher financial penalties for non-compliance, which can be allocated to funding reparations. Alrighty, I guess I'll just keep my 2 cents to myself right now so we can get through this. All right, so here's a chart. Interesting. I really don't feel like reading it, but maybe we have some people in the future or maybe listening that might be hearing impaired. So yes, for the family too, I'm gonna do it for y'all. All right, let's go. Okay, in this graph, it's starting out 1849 to 1855. I don't know, does the graph explain? It doesn't really explain what this graph is, but I'll do my best to go through the dates as we go. Here we go. 1849, 1855. Basically, this is a timeline chart. Looks like, is this in San Francisco? Yeah, I think this is just in San Francisco. So here we go. 1849, 1855. Most African Americans come to San Francisco as enslaved people working in the gold mines migrate to San Francisco seeking success from the opportunities of the California Gold Rush. 1852. Third Baptist Church, the first Black Baptist church west of the Rockies, is established. 1866, Mary Ellen Pleasant. Shout out to Mary Ellen Pleasant. As a matter of fact, I believe we actually did a Black History Month icon of the great ancestor Mary Ellen Pleasant. In 1866, Mary Ellen Pleasant, an early Black millionaire and founder of Underground Railroad, sues the Omnibus Railroad Company and the North Beach and Mission Railroad Company for ejecting her and 2 other Black women from a city streetcar. This case outlawed segregation in the city's public conveniences. let's see, 66 to 1950. Wait a minute. 66, 15. Okay. Oakland in 1915. Oakland, San Francisco NAACP chapter protests the film The Birth of a Nation, which was atrocious to the Black American experience. All right, San Francisco, 1945, looks like to 1955. San Francisco's Black population booms in the 1940s after Black Southerners come to work in the city's shipyards to meet the industrial demands of World War II. The jazz culture in the Fillmore District flourishes during this time and was a main performance venue for artists like Etta James, Billie Holiday, and Dizzy Gillespie. 1957, San Francisco Giants baseball legend Willie Mays is refused a home in San Francisco Wood because of his race. 1968, the Black Panther Party and the Peace and Freedom Party announced a political coalition. The Peace and Freedom Party slate of candidates include the Black Panthers' Kathleen Cleaver, who is nominated to run in California's 18th Assembly District, San Francisco, and Bobby Seale, a candidate for the 17th Assembly District seat, Oakland. San Francisco State University establishes the nation's first Black Studies program. 1969, Robert Chrisman and Nathan Hare of San Francisco published the first issue of the Black Scholar in November. Black San Franciscans represent 13.4% of the city's total population in an all-time high. The city's Black population would continue to decline throughout the 1970s, and that was in 1970. In 1969 was Robert Chrisman in establishing the first issue of the Black Scholar. All right. Let's see here. Section 3, Chapter 3. Black migration to San Francisco. One of San Francisco's founding fathers was a mixed-race Black and Jewish man named William A. Leidesdorf Jr., a Caribbean immigrant. Leidesdorf first came to Yerba Buena, what became San Francisco, when the settlement had fewer than 100 inhabitants, and helped to establish San Francisco as a growing coastal destination for investors and wealth seekers alike. Leidesdorf was a savvy businessman and was extremely politically active, donating land to create the first public school in San Francisco as well as California, was one of the city's first public school board. School board members, was elected city treasurer, and was appointed U.S. vice consul to Mexico, and is believed to be one of the first Black American millionaires due to his investments in steamboats and real estate. A growing community. When the 1940 census was taken, San Francisco's Black population had reached 4,846, accounting for 0.8% of the city's population in 1941. The global course of history exploded those numbers. Between 1940 to 1950, nearly 350,000 Black people migrated to California during what became known as the second wave of the Great Migration. African Americans who were both fleeing racial terror in the South and seeking new job and life opportunities in the North and West traveled to San Francisco. Beyond seeking refuge and a piece of the American dream in the San Francisco Bay Area, African Americans were recruited to become West and fill labor shortages in factories and shipyards, given the vacancy created by the number of white men who had gone off to war. African American men and women were needed to fulfill job duties that had previously been unavailable to them because of racial discrimination. Between the 1940 and 1950 census, the African American population in San Francisco grew from 4,846 to 74,383 people. During this time, a broader contingent of Black artists, home caregivers, and children also migrated to San Francisco, joining a cadre of technically skilled job seekers and shifting the demographic landscape of the city. Upon arrival in San Francisco, African Americans were met with hostile housing limitations imposed by the city's land use and planning codes, bank lending, and coordinated corporate business interests. Despite their limited new economic opportunities, the city government coordinated with local private entities and the federal government to restrict the physical and financial mobility of Black Americans across San Francisco. This was achieved through the enforcement of racially restrictive covenants, which were clauses written into property deeds that only allowed white Caucasian people to dwell in a home. Redlining, the banking practice of deeming Black and other communities of color blighted and thereby unworthy of bank lending due to the perceived risk of the investment. FHA lending discrimination, the discouragement of federal lending entities to extend lines of credit to non-white borrowers, and local zoning ordinances, which both added, example, highways or devastated, for example, schools and grocers. Construction in communities most populated by Black people. Various San Francisco entities perpetuated anti-Black racial discrimination and continue to operate today, including the San Francisco Planning and Urban Renewal Association, which later became the San Francisco Planning and Urban Research. An organization that aggressively pushed for the redevelopment of the Fillmore and advocated for San Francisco to center white Anglo-Saxon Protestant values to the exclusion and displacement of other racial and identity groups. Well, looks like somebody owes somebody some reparations. As the growth of San Francisco's African American population accelerated between 1940 and 1963, public and private entities facilitated and coddled the conditions that created near exclusive Black communities within the city, limited political participation and representation, de-invested from academic and cultural institutions, and intentionally displaced Black communities from San Francisco through targeted, sometimes violent actions. Workforce discrimination. African Americans in San Francisco were met with racial discrimination within the workforce. Before 1940, no Black worker was employed as a public school teacher, police officer, firefighter, streetcar conductor, bank teller, bus driver, cab driver. There were no Black streetcar workers until 1942. Within 2 years, the number of Black platform operators grew to 700, demonstrating that the lack of representation was not caused because there were no Black skilled workers. When the BART system was built in 1967, no Black workers were hired. When the BART system was built in 1967, no Black workers were hired. I'm going to put that in here. The National Labor Relations Board certified unions did not admit Black members, and BART refused to enforce non-discrimination policies for unions, despite the transit system being a government entity. Wow. All right, let's continue. As thousands of Black migrants moved to San Francisco to find work in the shipyards during World War II, they were met with hostility and rejection. Large unions like the Boilermakers refused to admit African Americans. When President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802, which stated that no employer receiving federal funding for defense contracts could discriminate, the Boilermakers created segregated auxiliary branches. The members of these shunted groups had no right to vote for officers within the legitimate Union branches. In 1942, when the United States Navy demanded that the San Francisco Housing Authority segregate housing for the thousands of workers and their families at the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard. In response, San Francisco built 5 segregated projects, 4 of which were for whites only. Black workers and their families had to wait on application lists to receive housing, while apartments earmarked for white workers sat empty. In 1952, the NAACP sued the San Francisco Housing Authority for continuing to only build housing units for white people, claiming that the city agency intended to localize the black population to the western addition and away from white neighborhoods. Though the NAACP won the legal case, the city continued to build segregated housing. Education discrimination. Despite the anti-enslavement clause in California's Constitution, black enslaved people that were brought to California were generally denied the right to education. As early as 1855, state laws were established to prevent local governments from receiving extra funding when they taught a black student. In 1863, a California law was passed that withheld state funds from schools that taught black children. Although black Californians were taxed to pay for the state's public schools, the money only paid for the education of white children. In 1874, the California Supreme Court upheld school segregation in San Francisco. Schools that did provide education of black students were generally provided less funding and resources compared to white schools, and were shamed for their equality. In San Francisco, the first all-black school was established in the basement of a church. 6 years after its creation, the San Francisco school superintendent, George Tate, stated to his school board that the room occupied by this school for the past few years is disgraceful to any civilized community and was squalid, dark, and unhealthy. Okay. Even after segregated schools were deemed unconstitutional through Brown versus Board of Education, many school boards and districts refused to take the steps to integrate schools. As late as the 1970s, the San Francisco School District faced court desegregation orders from black and Latino families. At the same time, activists began organizing and protesting against the neglect and misrepresentation of people of color in California's public colleges and universities. The first black student union on any campus in the United States was founded at San Francisco State University in 1966 by James Garrett and Jerry Vernado. The movement soon gained strong momentum. The creation of a BSU in San Francisco was propelled by national advocacy for the civil rights of black people, as alive and fervent in the city by the Bay as it was in Selma, Alabama at the time. In 1968, the Black Student Union, the Third World Liberation Front, faculty, campus staff, students, and other activists across the Bay Area all gathered at San Francisco State University and led a series of protests to define and shape their own educational experiences. After months of protests and negotiations around a list of student demands, the university agreed to establish a College of Ethnic Studies. This major, geared toward communities of color, was the first of its kind in the nation. Early community development. African Americans moving to San Francisco initially were legally limited to living in certain parts of the city due to exclusionary language in housing deeds called restrictive covenants, which only allowed white people to occupy the dwelling. Despite having residential development across the city of San Francisco, African Americans could only primarily live in Bayview, Hunters Point, and the Fillmore. In Hunters Point, many families lived in the small army barracks constructed for temporary shipyard workers. These were not intended for permanent inhabitation, but with limited resources and constraints on where they could live. Black families lived in these buildings until the 2000s, far longer than the initial timeline for their utilization. My gosh. It says black families lived in these buildings until the 2000s, far longer than the... Okay, here's an example of a restrictive racial covenant. It reads, racial restrictions. No property in said addition shall at any time be sold, conveyed, rented, or leased in whole or in part to any person or persons not of the white or Caucasian race. No person other than of the white or Caucasian race shall be permitted to occupy any property in said addition or portion thereof or building thereon, except a domestic servant actually employed by a person of the white or Caucasian race, where the latter is an occupant of such property. When the industrial boom subsided in 1945, following the end of World War II, job opportunities declined and black San Franciscans faced employment discrimination, rising unemployment rates, and housing disparities through a coordinated effort to limit and control the places in which black people could work, live, and be educated. By refusing bank loans for homes in areas that government and private entities did not want black people living, it limited the parts of the supply of available housing in San Francisco to African Americans. The pressures of housing demands exceeded the limited supply of housing available for black people. Much of the black population was heavily concentrated in the Western Addition and Bayview Hunters Point. All right, so there's a map that's shown here. It looks like it was a map created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, known as HOLC. Surveys in the 1930s grades San Francisco neighborhoods based on perceived risk to financial institution. All right, in this chart it says green is best while red is hazardous. These maps were the foundation of what's now commonly known as redlining, federal government sanctioned practice of denying home mortgages, business loans, and other financial services to certain neighborhoods. The effects of this practice are still felt today. Mid-1960s, elevated cultural profile of African Americans in San Francisco. The exponential growth of the African American population in San Francisco during the wartime era proved influential in establishing the city's arts and cultural national profile. African American musicians and artists were increasingly attracted to and visiting the Harlem of the West, a vibrant corridor in San Francisco's Fillmore district that became a gateway for black jazz musicians, thanks to the concentration of black-owned and black-serving venues and hotels. The Fillmore corridor was a vibrant destination for the city's black population, with restaurants, theaters, hotels, and other businesses that catered to a black clientele, when other businesses in San Francisco providing identical services refused entry to African American people. Business leader Charles Sullivan was foundational in establishing the Fillmore as a cultural epicenter of San Francisco and the region. All right, so let's put our good brother Charles Sullivan in the notes. All right. Additionally, community building was happening in Bayview Hunters Point, where there had been rapid housing construction and growing home ownership for African Americans. All right, here's a picture of a certificate of preference. An original certificate of preference issued by San Francisco Redevelopment Agency Executive Director Justin Herman to a Bayview Hunters Point resident in 1972. Beyond these disparate housing conditions, the jobs economy for African Americans in San Francisco also began to retract with the return of soldiers, wherein new opportunities for skills building and economic prosperity were rescinded to prioritize access to white GIs. This consequently grew the unemployment rate for Black residents whose desires for permanent placemaking were resented and unwelcome. As San Francisco enters the 1960s, the Summer of Love is also a preamble to years of targeted decision-making that will aggressively displace tens of thousands of Black citizens from San Francisco. Urban renewal and redevelopment backlash. The California Community Redevelopment Act, CCRA, was enacted in 1945 and later expanded in 1951, allowing cities to create redevelopment agencies. Governor's Redevelopment Proposal 2011. Upon passage, the objective of redevelopment agencies was to allow citizens and counties to confront identified blighted areas that created, quote, physical and economic liabilities requiring redevelopment in the interest of the health, safety, and general welfare of the people of these communities and of the state. Urban renewal was added to the Housing Act in 1954, initiating a national land redevelopment program marketed as an opportunity to revitalize economically depressed communities and bring economic development, growth, and private investments. The actual impact was catastrophic interruption and violent displacements of Black communities in major cities across the country, including San Francisco. Oh, man. Redevelopment was a federally funded program enacted through local agencies in coordination with private capital, subsidizing communities' development projects to bulldoze communities. The singular objective of urban renewal was economic development. By identifying target areas in cities where Black people and other undesired communities lived in clusters, redevelopment was sold as an opportunity to reduce crime rates, increase property value, spur job growth, and beautify the city's landscape. While not all communities that were raised through urban renewal were African American, Black communities were always included in a city's urban renewal plan. In San Francisco, this manifested as the razing of 40 square blocks in the Fillmore and the displacement of nearly 20,000 people who were given no legal protection and offered no moving costs, temporary housing, or other remedies. The impact of this expulsion of a community was not only limited to the Fillmore. In many ways, Bayview Hunters Point shifted to receive and welcome people displaced by urban renewal across town. When Black community residents and businesses were displaced, they often moved to another historically Black San Francisco community. Redevelopment was a menacing, devastating project executed with precision on primarily Black residents and business owners in an era of concentrated Black economic wealth in San Francisco. This action by the redevelopment agency had no accountability or recourse, since removal was framed as an action with a public purpose eminent domain. Residents and businesses were given worthless promissory notes that they could one day return, but historically, certificates of preference have not been tracked and have rarely been honored. Well, looks like that $5 million is an interjection, by the way. Looks like that $5 million is looking about right. Probably need even more after all this evidence. Anyway, let's continue. The aftermath of the disruptive actions of redevelopment have been government-manufactured inequities yielding stunted economic security, mobility, and opportunity of a specific ethnic group in San Francisco, African Americans. All right, so I just want to restate this interjects African Americans who descend from U.S. chattel slavery. So let's be clear about that. All right, that's the interjection. Let's go. Throughout it all, Black residents have worked to maintain connectedness, and a sense of community and belonging in a city that they helped to build. Fighting for inclusion in the face of racial exclusion written into the landscape through public policy decisions and private advocacy. The contemporary landscape for San Francisco's diverse Black populations is shaped by persistent disinvestment in population stabilizing strategies and a lack of recourse for anti-Black discrimination. Federal and local policies since the 1970s have shaped San Francisco's landscape by continuing a practice of forcefully displacing communities through decisions driven by race. In 1996, the Clinton administration announced the One Strike Law, a public housing drug policy that evicted not only the violator, but their entire family. If they were caught using marijuana, which is now legal today in California, or any other drug in any quantity. Planning decisions coupled with employment discrimination and disparities accelerated housing development in ways that pushed low-income Black people out of their homes and further into the margins. The impacts are borne on San Francisco streets where 70% of the unhoused population was previously housed in San Francisco and nearly 40% of the unhoused population is Black. Black San Francisco residents have also been subject to environmental racism due to limited access to housing options in ecologically hazardous locations. The historically Black neighborhood of Bayview Hunters Point has been contaminated by radioactive material from the nearby shipyards, houses the city's only wastewater processing facility, and because of this proximity, the neighboring community experiences disproportionate rates of chronic conditions and cancers. This phenomenon is not experienced by wider, wealthier areas of the city. Oil production facilities are located in close proximity to Black neighborhoods as well. The impact of environmental injustice, as well as the myriad of social determinants of health that affect Black San Franciscans, has significantly shortened the lifespan of this racial group as compared with other San Franciscans. African Americans have the lowest life expectancy compared to any other group in San Francisco. In addition, Black Californians also have the highest mortality rate in 9 out of the top 10 causes of death in San Francisco. Predominantly Black communities have disproportionately higher rates of chronic disease, including asthma and lower birth rates. Black communities are more vulnerable to industrial and military-grade toxic radioactive water exposure and asbestos-contaminated dust. While San Francisco city government has emphasized its positions against slavery, discrimination, and anti-Black racism through hundreds of resolutions, ordinances, research papers, and hearings, including but not limited to the following, and also noted in the addendum at the end of this document. Okay, so here's a couple of, really don't even feel like reading all this stuff. Let's see here. I guess I'll just read. Yeah, let me read it. Resolution declaring anti-Black racism as a human rights and public health crisis, San Francisco, August 21st, 2020. Report of the San Francisco's Mayor's Task Force on African American Out-Migration 2009. The Unfinished Agenda, the Economic Status of African Americans in San Francisco, 1964 to 1990, February 1993. Report of the Interim Committee on Human Relations, October 8th, 1964. Mayor Breed announced a spending plan for historic reinvestment in San Francisco's African American community, what later became the Dreamkeeper Initiative, February 25th, 2021. Mayor London Breed issues executive directive to encourage recruitment and retention of diverse workforce. San Francisco Office of Cannabis Secretary Report, Karen Act, Slavery error disclosure. Resolution urging Recreation and Parks to remove the name of Justin Herman from the plaza located at the intersection of the Embarcadero and Market Street. Resolution affirming the city and county of San Francisco's commitment to making Fillmore Jazz Preservation District. Ordinance creating the African American Arts Cultural District. Ordinance established African American Reparations Advisory Committee, December 18, 2020. African American City-wide Historic Context Statement. Dozens of hearings on the state of African American employment and economic mobility in San Francisco. Creation of the Abundant Birth Project to address infant mortality and maternal morbidity in the African American community. Multiple hearings on the African American student achievement gap and creating Malcolm X, Willie Brown, June Jordan Academy. Conclusion. San Francisco's international reputation as a shining progressive gem in the West is undermined by its legacy of mistreatment, violence towards, and targeted racism against Black Americans. While neither San Francisco nor California formally adopted the institution of child slavery, the values of segregation, white supremacy, and systemic repression and exclusion of Black people were legally codified and enforced. Still, the promise of social liberties for all through innovative governing is not elusive. Through every experience, Black people have found joy, built community, and continue to advocate for their human and civil rights in San Francisco. This San Francisco Reparations Plan is guided by quantitative data, the conclusions from previous reports on the status of African American communities in San Francisco, and extensive qualitative feedback shared by people with firsthand lived experience as Black citizens in San Francisco. The city's government has the opportunity to take steps that redress the discriminatory actions taken to violently displace, limit political participation, invisibilize, restrict the physical and financial mobility of and otherwise harm Black people across San Francisco. Through a tailored plan, San Francisco can redress the public policies explicitly created to subjugate Black people in San Francisco by upholding and expanding the intent and legacy of chattel slavery, whose vestiges continue to have impacts today. All right, so let's see here. Let me see how many pages. Okay. All right, so I guess we should probably stop there because it looks like they're going to start getting into eligibility for reparations. You know what? Let's go for it. Let's at least start with the first page. And then we'll go ahead and continue tomorrow. So this is some of the eligibility for reparations according to the San Francisco Reparations Plan. All right. Checklist for eligibility required. An individual who has identified as Black/African American on public documents for at least 10 years, 18 years or older. You must meet at least 2 criteria from the following list, must have supporting documentations. Born in San Francisco between 1940 and 1996, and has proof of residency in San Francisco for at least 13 years. All right. Migrated to San Francisco between 1940 and 1996 and has proof of residency in San Francisco for at least 13 years. Personally, okay, so I just want to reiterate for those who have resided in San Francisco, it said you must meet at least 2 of these criteria, so just want to reiterate that one. All right. Personally or the direct descendant of someone incarcerated by the failed war on drugs. Record of attendance in San Francisco public schools during the time of the consent decree to complete desegregation within the school system. descendant of someone enslaved through U.S. chattel slavery before 1865, displaced or the direct descendant of someone displaced from San Francisco by urban renewal between 1954 and 1973, listed or the direct descendant of a certificate of preference holder, member of an historically marginalized group that experienced lending discrimination in San Francisco between 1937 and 1968, or subsequently experienced lending discrimination in formerly redlined San Francisco communities between 1968 and 2008. Recommendations. The recommendations are presented by the subcommittee issue areas that led the process of procurement, informed by feedback from public meetings, outreach engagements, and surveys, in addition to ongoing research conducted by the subcommittees. Several recommendations emerged consistently across subcommittee areas. These are presented as overall recommendations. All right, so I'm just going to continue through overall recommendations, and we're going to continue tomorrow. So let's finish this one up. Overall recommendations. The city and county of San Francisco and its agencies should issue a formal apology for past harms and commit to making substantial ongoing systemic and programmatic investments in Black communities to address historical harms. Establish an independent Office of Reparations within the city to execute this plan, which I believe they might be having actually this tomorrow. So let's go see if San Francisco is going to keep their word, because it looks like historically they haven't been doing such a great job. Interjection. All right, next. This agency must be charged with tracking and ensuring the continued success of programs that come out of these recommendations. And 3, create and fund a committee of community stakeholders, such as Reparations Stakeholder Authority or similar, to ensure equity and continuity in the implementation of relevant policy initiatives, independent of the city and county of San Francisco. All right, so we're going to go ahead and stop there and continue at economic empowerment. Based on this, we might have like 2 more readings. So probably one tomorrow, and maybe now Thursday once again is the final report. So I know we have a couple of events after the report, so if I'm not feeling too tired, I actually might continue reading this San Francisco report. I don't think we're going to get it done tomorrow for sure, but we'll definitely be back in the building because this is some good information. We're going to continue reading this because it looks like it's going to start talking about the $5 million thing going on. So yeah, once again, shout out to Reps for always showing up. Appreciate you. All right. Callie G in the building. What's up? What's up? This has been going on for years and years and years and years. Nothing new. It's happened all over the USA and the world. Facts. All right, fam. Thanks for coming through. Appreciate you. Once again, go check out Reparations Now documentary. We take a deep dive, talk to the community from Weed all the way down to San Diego. But we still have a lot of documenting to do. It's not over. So anything you can do to support the cause, we would greatly appreciate it. Even I think it's for $4.99. You can go to reparationsnowdoc.com. That's less than a cheeseburger, or maybe be the same as a cheeseburger. I don't know. You got to eat first. I get it. Once you got you can eat, you paid rent, you did all that good stuff, taking care of family. If you got $4.99 to spare, please put it to the cause, because this is all independently funded. All right. Anyway, thanks once again. Everybody have a wonderful night. And on that note, family, peace, and reparations, and we'll continue.
The way it currently stands, forced labor, slavery takes precedence over rehabilitation and public safety.
Oh, by the way, while the Biden administration gives reparations to everyone but free people, look at the billions he has run over to Ukraine.
We don't have black grocery stores because if you think about it now, just to get in that supply chain, it's almost unheard of.
They don't want the truth to get out. Okay? I don't want to know what my family did or what all these people did and all this stuff like that. Okay? You read that 500-page report.
There's this thing called white superiority and black inferiority. That mindset allows all of the behaviors that we've seen across generations.
They had no idea that that church I was running by every day was something my grandfather established.
This is not a handout. This is a debt that is owed.
You know, Allensworth was like the internet of his time in 1904, 1905.
The total black population in California is about 2.6 million, and then of that, the descendants compose about 2.2 million of that. So California, with a multi-billion-dollar surplus, can absolutely afford to satisfy the international terms for reparations, beginning with compensation.
Any financial obstacle that exists that impedes the success of increasing financial prosperity needs to be dealt with and eliminated.
No matter where we've been, no matter what part of this fight we've been in, we've been harmed, and we've had harm done to us specifically.
When I got to Los Angeles, this was some of the worst segregation I'd ever seen. And remember, I'm telling you, I'm from Mississippi.
Because as you can see, I'm giving you broken history right now, you know? But I had to give it to you guys today. I said, no, I got to show them this because it's so precious and nobody really knows about it.
Overnight, it's like, oh, it's no longer the quarters, now it's Lincoln Heights. Oh, so now we get to use Abraham Lincoln for our name. And you think about all the other people that they could have used, but they picked Lincoln. And I think that's sort of a stereotypical of what they do.
There wasn't any black restaurants. As far as black business and weed, it wasn't none.
Black people don't have that kind of luxury. Our historically black communities have been redistricted multiple times.
Why has it been easier for other groups than us?
Because of anti-black hatred.
Now listen, if you can't handle the TR room, don't tune in.